Hi, so I'm Jeff Robinson, and I'm joining you from Bunurong Land in sunny Melbourne. And my co-chair is Mark Vender, will come after me. And it's great, actually, that this working group has gone after the steel and aluminium and plastic folk, because we need those working groups to do lots and lots of work to get the embodied carbon down. So that the section that we look after, which is building services, the raw materials that we're looking at are lower in embodied carbon. So our focus is really on the driving the development and uptake of low embodied carbon building services. And as you can imagine, given the fact of the complexity of building services and the fact that it's in many different industries, both the building industry and in infrastructure, it has a very, very important role to play. So the first part we felt when we sort of got the working group together, we sort of looked at a number of the members and allied organizations, and we felt that the most important thing initially was to raise the awareness of the need to reduce embodied carbon in the building services industry. And I think that was really important, because a lot of the focus in building services over the last number of years has actually been in reducing operational carbon to go and make building services more efficient and so on. But so there was a fair amount of work, or is a fair amount of work to do to raise that awareness that actually we also need to look at reducing the embodied carbon of services. And associated with that, we've really focused on what can we do to improve the measurement and benchmarking of embodied carbon in building services, and also to help the manufacturers and suppliers by demonstrating that there's there's actually demand for low carbon building services. We have a pretty diverse group of people in our working group. We've got consultants, we've got some developers, contractors, manufacturers, some government folk, equipment suppliers, and industry bodies. And the working group has about 40 people, and I would say probably be about maybe 10 or 12 kind of join our regular meetings. I'm going to hand over to Mark now to talk about some of the individual projects and things we've been involved with.
Thanks very much, Jeff, and very happy to be joining you all here today from Wurundjeri lands. So Jeff's already spoken, I guess, about the ideas behind Working Group 5e. In terms of our objectives, one of the things we do, building services by its nature is quite often invisible. People only tend to notice building services when they're not working. So we do serve the purpose of getting involved in conversations about embodied carbon and providing input from the experts that are part of our working group. And also, like Jeff said, the focus tends to be on operational emissions coming from building services. So we're aiming to increase awareness of embodied carbon in our space by organising events. So some of the things that we've done so far in our working group, I think a couple of people have mentioned that Neighbours are developing a framework for embodied carbon. And there was a consultation open earlier this year that different working groups within MECLA provided input for, and our group was one of those. We've also we've undertaken a couple of sessions to increase awareness. So there's specific meetings with groups of manufacturers to try and increase awareness there, and also understand the issues that the manufacturers are facing. And in other industry events that are targeting building services professionals, so those organised by ERA, my organisation, and other organisations like CIBSI, that go out to people in our profession to talk more about embodied carbon. and we're currently working towards a spotlight event for a wider audience. And I guess part of that is targeting these stakeholders who we think aren't necessarily up to speed on embodied carbon. So that at the moment we're looking at manufacturers, architects, government procurement teams, and building occupants as well. One thing we've seen in our group, Jeff mentioned the need for benchmarking and measurement, and how it is difficult in building services because it's not just one material. You know, an HVAC system, for example, is made up of lots of different materials. So what we are seeing is that the consultants, especially in our group, they're all working in their own teams, trying to measure this stuff and find ways of reducing embodied carbon. So our group tends to share a lot of information about the different projects they're working on. And I guess what I noticed there is a huge desire and will to get this work going, which is really encouraging. And we're also working on it. We've got a standard slide deck that we've used before, but it's something that we're also changing for the different stakeholder groups that I mentioned just now, where we think that there's a potential to raise awareness. So lots of work to do. I think that in some ways, building services probably is coming in a little bit later than some of the other materials in terms of awareness and the work that's going on, but we know that it is a really important area to get done as well. And with that added complication, I suppose, as Jeff mentioned, that we have to make sure that these systems are good operationally, but also in terms of embodied carbon. So that's the Building Services Group. And we'll move on now to engineered timber. So I'm going to hand over to Stephen and Hamid.